Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Early in life, I learned an important truth that would guide the rest of my life. Growth rarely happens in comfort. If you learn that in yours, very rarely do we stride forward during the easy seasons. Growth rarely happens in comfort. It happens in supply closets when scarred knees are stretched. It happens at dinner tables when you're forced to relearn how to pick up that fork. And it happens on screened-in porches when you're reminded that the can of gasoline isn't chasing you anymore. These are all lessons I learned as a kid you may have watched in the film Soul on Fire. Jonathan Babcock lives this truth in his story. I first learned about Jonathan and heard his story when he was nominated as someone who is on fire for good. One nomination for an individual is meaningful. Two is impressive, but it's happened before. But Jonathan, yes, Jonathan outdid both of those. Jonathan has been nominated not by three, but by four different individuals. Yes, four people have nominated Jonathan Babcock as someone who is on fire for good. So that got my attention. But in learning more about him, I realized something even more powerful. Jonathan isn't chasing recognition. He's simply living a life that has been modeled for him that is elevating the lives of others. It's an incredible story. Jonathan grew up in a home where service was just a way of life. It's how they did things. His parents stayed late to help out. They gave generously. They made room for others at their table. Their faith wasn't loud, but it was consistent and it was generous. So when Jonathan felt called to serve at-risk youth, he stepped forward. And he felt the distance immediately. He saw the gap between his stable upbringing and their unpredictable realities, between the list of adults that he could call on at a moment's notice for anything, and frequently the silence that these young men faced when no one answered their calls for help, between a childhood marked by presence and one marked by absence. Jonathan had adults who showed up and who stayed around. And these boys, the ones he was serving, many of them had been taught through example that adults leave. They don't stick around, they're unreliable. So Jonathan stepped into space marked by trauma, instability, and deep, deep distrust. And at first, he wondered if he belonged there. He wasn't sure if the work he was doing, the relationships that he was fostering were even important, if it made a difference. But Jonathan did not leave. He kept coming back. Maybe that's the key. And when the conversations were awkward, he came back. When trust from the other wasn't given to him, he came back. When progress felt invisible, Jonathan came back again and again and again. And one of the most formative relationships in Jonathan's journey was with a young man named Reuben. It reminded him that showing up again and again and again matters. There was no cinematic breakthrough moment. No swelling music, no dramatic speech. No, between Reuben and Jonathan, it was just quiet meetings, sometimes with guarded eyes, short answers, and oftentimes long silences. Reuben had learned repeatedly that every adult he looked up to eventually disappeared. So Jonathan did the most radical thing he could in the life of someone else. He just came back. Week after week, he showed up, not with perfect advice, but with steady presence. He helped Reuben with ordinary things that maybe many of us on this call, in our lives, on this podcast, take for granted, like filling out forms, applying for jobs, getting to work on time. And in time, something remarkable happened. Both of them began to shift forward in life. Jonathan realized the boys he wished to serve did not need a rescuer, they needed a friend. They needed someone not to fix them, but they needed someone willing to walk with them. And Reuben learned that if his life mattered enough that some random guy named Jonathan would keep showing up for him, well, maybe he should start showing up more fully for himself. It turns out in those relationships, both men's lives changed. And my friends, you don't need all the answers to begin. You don't need a perfect plan or extraordinary credentials. You simply need courage and a little bit of humility to step into the discomfort. It's how lives change. It's how communities heal. And it's how we become the answer to someone else's silent prayer. If you're wondering whether one person can make a difference, just ask the 4 different people who nominated Jonathan. Each of them convinced that their life is better because he chose to show up and he chose to stick around. My friends, I thank you for sticking around the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. I thank you for living this message. And I thank you for knowing that although the headwinds may be real, but also the foundation is firm and our best is yet to come. So for this time and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift. Live with your soul on fire.